Everybody on internet land join us too. Um, Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. We're a little early, but that's okay. I do want to thank everybody for being here today. We greatly appreciate you all making your way here this morning. Folks online, thank you all for joining us as well. The only difference between being here and being there is you can't taste the delicious food if you're not here. And you can't smell it either. And that is going to be, I'm not going to lie, the toughest thing about today. This may be the shortest messages ever. Because I've smelled turkey and ham for 2 days now. And the stuffing, anyway. So then seeing everything else. So I'm looking forward to it and hope you all are as well. A few things real quick, just as a way of announcements go. Monday night Pal Talk study. If anybody would like to join us for that, it's on 7 o'clock Monday nights. It is online, so if you'd like to get the information on how to get online and join us there, and let me know and we can get you taken care of. Wednesday night, we've been going through the book of Matthew. Technically, we finished chapter 14. I don't know. We might not have. We'll see. But I think we have finished chapter 14. This Wednesday... This Wednesday, Delilah and I are going down to her mom and dad's Wednesday. So Wednesday night, we'll cancel this Wednesday night. Go be with family. I mean, your other family. No, so. We're going to go down and visit her mom and dad Wednesday. So we'll go ahead and cancel Wednesday night for this week and this week only. Another reason why it's going to take 18 years to go through Matthew. It's all right. It's my fault. All right. Bruce is going to come up and read a couple passages here in a moment. Colossians chapter 2, verse 10, and then Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. He'll come in and read those in a few moments. Sunday service childcare. If we have somebody, I don't know if anybody signed up yet. I've not looked yet. I should probably look at that, but Storm. Okay. Okay. Well, all right. Okay. Sunday morning snacks for next Sunday. Obviously, we should be well taken care of today. If anybody would like to sign up for snacks for next week, by all means, go ahead and do that. December 3rd. Remember, that'll be our first Sunday Q&A. So we've got 2 questions that we've not gotten to yet from before. So if there's any others that anybody would like to add to it, we do have a box out there. You can write those out, and then we'll go through that. Remember, today's the Thanksgiving gathering, as Delilah's called it. So we're glad that everybody's here. A couple things that I do want to mention real quick. Randy's not here yet, but his buddy Frank, he messaged me this week. Frank's a guy he knows. He's known him for years. He's the one that cooks for him every once in a while. So Randy goes and meets with him. He sent me some pictures or videos of him playing the banjo, which is a banjo he actually constructed himself. And then he also played a banjolele. It's a banjo and ukulele put together somehow. I know, it seems uncalled for, but it's there. So it's a thing. But he makes these instruments, and he can play pretty much everything. So... But Frank's not been doing well. Wednesday night, Randy took him to the hospital, and so they're gonna keep checking some things on him. So keep Frank in your thoughts and prayers. Also, not everybody. I don't think everybody's on Facebook, so not everybody's in the little Facebook group. But Renee sent out about Oliver and Allie's Mimi. She's going to have Christine Hawkins is her name, so they're going to be checking on that, and they're thinking it's about 95% sure that they think it's cancer, so they're going to be checking on that. So keep them in your prayers as well. Trying to think. Ronnie and Judith, obviously with Ronnie's back and things like that. Anybody else that we need to add? Remember, I asked Bob about about the folks that they went down and saw last weekend. So keep the family in mind.
Her name is Yoko.
Huh?
Yoko.
Yoko? All right, thank you. So my pen's over there. So remember Yoko, the family especially, they're gonna need some comfort really soon. So keep them in mind. I think that's about it as far as announcements. One thing I do want to, so for the Sunday, I don't know, we'll see. So we got this little doorbell, right? So for folks, we're moving up Tom Bruchet type stuff, folks. Now,
He has a doorbell.
it's a little doorbell just to let Sunday school folks know when we're finished. They have it to where they say we're done. Let the adults know that we're done. We'll do it the other way. Children, adults are done. So no, so that way we can let everybody know. That way, not everybody's like, "Where's my kids?" So I don't think it's a problem, but we'll see what happens. It was $10.
So we need it for the front as well.
Yes, we'll do something. So, but anyway, just to kind of let everybody know that would also work as a hey, you need to come back in here too. So we can do multiple things. It does have a lot of different songs and things like that, but we'll just no reason to get fancy, huh? I'll pretend I didn't hear that. No. Stop on time.
Back in class. Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to look at Colossians chapter 2 and Colossians chapter 3. I'm going to start with Colossians 2, verse 10. And ye are complete in him, which is the head of all principality and power. And then Colossians chapter 3, verses 1 through 4. If ye then be risen with Christ, seek those things which are above, where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. Set your affection on things above, not on things on the earth. For ye are dead, and your life is hid with Christ in God. When Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall ye also appear with him in glory. Amen.
Let's see. All my stuff's here. We go. All right, we'll go ahead and dismiss the kids. Before they go, Janie Bell likes to take pictures. I don't know if you ever noticed her with the camera or not. She does like to take pictures. She takes very good pictures. And so Lisa had some of those put together in a little booklet. I'm going to have a box where people leave their phones. No. But there's a little booklet that we have. Just some of the things from the conference last year, our old place, a couple things from the new place here. So we've got this set out front, so if anybody wants to take a look at that, you're more than welcome to. Seems like there's something else I was going to mention, but if you want to take a look at it, it's out there on the front. Thank you very much. Front table. So, all right, youngsters, you may go, when are you wanting to do the song? Right now? Okay. All right, so, okay. So, let's bring them back. My bad. Well, that's a different thing. Nothing like some copyright strikes, right? Oh, yeah.
We're gonna get it. I saw that it was on, I tried to mute it, but
It's all right. They'll only mute that short period of time, so. All righty. Let's go back to Daniel. Let's go to Daniel chapter 8. What we've done is, as we've gone through this, is we've been looking at the timeline of Israel's past and future. And the last time what we did is we looked at Daniel chapter 9. And of course, in Daniel chapter 9, he lays out some things for us. Remember, we've got the 5 courses of judgment that are taking place, and those are on the nation of Israel for a specific purpose, right? And one of the things we've talked about with that is the Gentiles are already left off to themselves, right? Genesis 1 through 11, God turns them over, gives them up, all that stuff in Genesis chapters 1 through 11. Romans tells us about that. So then what takes place is, starting around Judges, and of course we've got charts that we've handed out and things like that. But starting off in Judges, you got these all the way through. You find out that you get the first course of judgment. Leviticus chapter 26 tells us that second, third, fourth, and fifth judgment. And of course, one of the things we talked about is all 5 of those courses are taking place. It's not one starts and then it stops and then the second one starts and stops and all that. All those things run concurrent. They're running together, right? And we've talked about that. And we've also mentioned the fact that whenever they go off into Babylonian captivity, Daniel understands that there are 70 years that they're going to be in captivity. So when we're in Daniel chapter 2, that's where we find ourselves, right? So part of the nation of Israel, the northern kingdoms, were sent off into Assyrian captivity. The lower 2 nations, or the lower 2 tribes, are sent off into Babylonian captivity. And of course, each group has their own prophets and things like that. What we find here is Daniel knows that there's some things that are taking place. But we also know, based on Daniel chapter 9, what is it that God reveals to them is that there's going to be a 70 weeks that are determined upon thy people. And of course, we talked about who's thy people. And of course, we know that that's talking about the nation of Israel. Okay, so there's 70 weeks that are determined upon them. And in Daniel chapter 9, just as a reminder, in Daniel chapter 9, what we notice in verse 25, notice it says, Daniel 9:25, "Know therefore and understand that from the going forth of the commandment to restore and build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks." So you've got 7 weeks and then 62 weeks. And of course, that's split up. And one of the things we talked about last time is when you notice there it says, the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And in verse 26 it says, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off." And what we mentioned there is after that 69th week, sometime after that, is when Jesus Christ is crucified. And that's that issue of, again, words mean stuff, right? So in verse 26 it says, "And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off." So after that 62nd week, what takes place is you've got the cross there, right? And of course, what we found out after that, you had the death, burial, resurrection of Jesus Christ. He comes back down to speak to the little flock and those for 40 days. And then he ascends in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, right? Of course, we know. Then they're told, "Why stand you gazing? He's going to come in like manner." Well, in Acts chapter 2, what takes place is the Holy Spirit comes down, which is a fulfillment of Joel chapter 2, right? So there's some things that are taking place that we've already been dealing with and talking about. From Acts chapter 1, what we've mentioned the last time is over to Acts chapter 7, you've got about a 1 year period of time. Right? And of course, we looked at the parable where Jesus Christ is talking about saying, I've come for 3 years looking for fruit. There isn't any. And then he says, well, give me 1 year also. Let me dig about it, dung it. If it brings forth fruit, yeah, that's good. If not, then cut it down. And so when Christ is on the cross and he says, Father, forgive them for they know not what they do, that's when we get that 1 year period of time of an extension of mercy to the nation of Israel. Now, what's interesting is, after the 62 weeks, this takes place. And then what do we know is during this whole time period, none of that 70th week has started. Right? And there's things that's supposed to take place. Notice, and after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. Notice, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the world desolations are determined. All right? So what we notice there is there's an issue after that crucifixion. Christ is crucified. Notice it says, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood, and unto the end of the war desolations are determined. So there's a few things there that I want us to be able to think about and go through in our minds with regard to this. Notice in verse 27, and he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even unto the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate. Father, we thank you once again for your word, that it's written out that we can read it, that we can come to it and try to understand things and try to put things together, and just allow your word to be the final authority in all things, that we just take it for what it says, and we just come to a greater knowledge and appreciation of it, that we through patience and comfort of the scriptures might have hope. And it's in Christ's name we pray. Amen. Now, one of the things that we see here, hopefully, is in verse 26. There's this period where after the 69th week, Christ is crucified, and then what happens is, and the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. Now, one of the things that we've talked about before, and I want to clear some of these things up this morning, is during a lot of this, what is it that Daniel's dealing with there in Babylonian captivity is we saw the image of the man, right? The head of gold and all that stuff. And what we find out is there's 4 different kingdoms, but the 4th kingdom is actually split up at the end where you have the iron mixed with miry clay, and you actually have that same thing, right? So that's on top of all of this, because you got to think, during these 70 years, this is when Daniel's over in Babylonian captivity, right? And so then when we're back here in Daniel, just jump back fairly quickly to Daniel chapter 1, and we see this. Daniel chapter 1, verse 1. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem, and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, king of Judah, into his hand, which with part of the vessels of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar to the house of his God, and he brought the vessels unto the treasures, into the treasure house of his God. And the king spake unto Ashpenaz, the master of his eunuchs, that he should bring certain of the children of Israel, of the king's seed, and of the princes. And what they're going to do is they're going to make them special in that particular kingdom. So what happens is they're off in Babylonian captivity. That's what takes place here. In chapter 2, what we see is Nebuchadnezzar has a dream. And of course, Daniel is the one that interprets it. In verse 37 says, Thou art king, thou, O king, art a king of kings, for the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, and strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, fowls of the heaven, hath he given into thy hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So what we find out is you've got this head of gold here with Babylon, and then he continues on. Notice in verse 39, and after thee shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and a third kingdom of brass, which shall bear rule over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be as strong as iron, for as much as iron breaketh in pieces, and subdueth all things. And as iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise. And whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, notice there's not a fifth kingdom there, right? He says, you're the first, there's a kingdom that comes after you, a third kingdom and a fourth kingdom, and he doesn't say that there's a fifth kingdom. It's what happens is you've got this fourth kingdom, what takes place is, iron that breaketh all these, shall it break in pieces and bruise, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of potter's clay and part of iron. And so then what I want us to be able to think about is what's taking place is, during Christ's reign, what normally happens is when we get to that fourth kingdom, and we'll see some other things here. Once we get to that fifth kingdom, what most people say is the fifth kingdom, what we want to make those is Rome, right? And what I want us to do is take a look at some things to kind of rethink that idea. So go with me over to Daniel chapter 8. In Daniel chapter 8, notice some things that's going to take place. So we know we've already talked about Babylon. We get the Medes and Persians, and then we've got Greece. We've talked about those. Now, notice here, Daniel chapter 8, verse 1. And in the third year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that it was that I was in Shashan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulai. Then I lifted up mine eyes, and saw, and behold, there stood before the river a ram, which had two horns, and the two horns were high, but one was higher than the other, and the higher came up last. And I saw the ram pushing westward and northward and southward, so that no beast might stand before him, neither was there any that could cover or could deliver out of his hand, but he did according to his will, and became great. And as I was considering, behold, an he-goat, he came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground, and the goat had a notable horn between his eyes. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which I had seen stand before the river, and ran in unto him in the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him. And of course, choler means anger. And smote the ram, and brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him, but he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. Therefore the he-goat waxed very great, and he was strong. The great horn was broken, and for it came up four notable ones toward the four winds of heaven. And out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great toward the south, and toward the east, and toward the pleasant land. And it waxed great even to the host of heaven, and it cast down some of the host and of the stars to the ground, and stamped upon them. Yea, he magnified himself even to the prince of the host, and by him the daily sacrifice was taken away, and the place of his sanctuary was cast down. And an host was given him against the daily sacrifice by reason of transgression, and it cast down the truth to the ground, and practiced and prospered. And I heard one saint speaking, and another saint said unto that certain saint which spake, How long shall be the vision concerning the daily sacrifice and the transgression of desolation, to give both the sanctuary and the host to be trodden under foot? And he said unto me, Unto 300 days there shall be the sanctuary cleansed. Now, there's a few things that I want us to see, comparing some stuff over in the next little bit where we actually see these being interpreted. All right. Now, notice in verse 17. Notice in verse 17. So he came near where I stood, and when he came, I was afraid and fell upon my face. But he said unto me, Understand, O son of man, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. Now, one of the things that what we see there is based on that statement, what do we know that that's going to place us as far as a timeline goes? He says, for at the time of the end shall be the vision. So where is it that we're going to be looking for this? Or where should we be looking for this? At the end of something, right? And of course, that's one of those things that we notice. Notice here in verse 18. Now as he was speaking with me, I was in deep sleep on my face toward the ground, but he touched me and set me upright. And he said, Behold, I will make thee know what shall be in the last end of the indignation, for at the time appointed the end shall be. Notice, the ram which thou sawest having two horns are the kings of Media and Persia. So what's that tell us about the ram there in the actual vision? Who's the ram? Media, Persia, right? It's the kings of Media and Persia. So we see that. Notice, he says, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia. So that gives us right here, right? So then keep on going. Notice what we have. And the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Now, that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, but not in his power. So what's that tell us that's going to take place with Greece? Well, you've got four different groups that's coming out of that. Now, a little while back when we were talking about this, one of the things that we're going to find out is when you go through who is in verse 21, and the rough goat is the king of Grecia, and the great horn that is between his eyes is the first king. Well, who is the great horn there? Alexander the Great. And what happens to Alexander the Great is his kingdom is divided up into four different pieces. Now, here's the pieces. You've got Macedonia, which is Greece, that area. You've got Turkey, which is Asia Minor, today Turkey. You've got Syria, and you've got Egypt. All right? So when we take a look at that, those are the four regions from which that one kingdom is broken up and split off. And that's what we see here in verse 22. Now that being broken, whereas four stood up for it, four kingdoms shall stand up out of the nation, of course being Greece, but not in his power. And notice, and in the what? Latter time of their kingdoms. Notice, and at the latter time of their kingdoms, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding, dark sentences shall stand up, and by his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. Well, where does that one guy come from? One of these places, right? And so then when we take a look at this, you've got thinking geographically. By the way, you know when Paul's talking about, even in Acts and in Romans and other places, what's the distinction that he makes between people is between the Jews and the Romans, right? No? Jews and the Greeks. So they're still there during that time, right? So then also you think a lot of people, what they'll do is the abomination of desolation, they'll say, well, that's Antioch Epiphanes in 70 AD. Well, here's the problem with that. Can prophecy be fulfilled during the mystery program? You're in the mystery program in 70 AD. So one of the reasons that people do that is they look at history and say, well, this is going to be this, this is going to be this, this is going to be this, and they do it without regard of understanding right the divide in their scriptures. So then, when we think about those things, that's where a lot of that stuff comes from, right? And of course, you can do with it what you want with all those things. But if you think of these things geographically, where are all these places? They're in the Middle East, that area, right? What is it that God's dealing with in this whole thing is who? The nation of Israel, which should be in Jerusalem, that area, right? we know that the area that he's going to give them, the land that is theirs, it's a lot bigger than that little sliver that people are talking about today. And again, it's that idea of when you look at Gaza and all the stuff that's taking place over there, those things aren't what we see here, right? And we've talked about that, so we take some solace in that. We'll look at those things as we go through. But when you think about geographically, you've got Macedonia, which is really Greece. Then you've got Asia Minor, which would be Turkey, right? Then you got Assyria. And then you've got Egypt. So, and again, in the 80s, the king of the north, everybody was like, well, that's Russia, because that's who we were fighting. Well, who is it today? Well, Canada? You know, you look at that stuff, you're like, it's going to change based on what's going on in the world, right? But here's the problem. We're going to look at a verse here in a minute that the king of the north is attacked by somebody from the north. What's north of Russia? Santa Claus, right? So you think about that stuff geographically. When you think about those things, you just kind of think, well, that doesn't even make sense time-wise, but spiritually and even scripturally. But there is something north of Assyria, and we'll look at these things a little bit more as we continue on. But here's what I want us to notice is there's two kingdoms here that come out of Greece that kind of stand up above the other two, and it's going to be these two right here. Right? And we see that in Daniel chapter 11. But notice, let's keep on going here. Verse 22, we see the four kingdoms that stand up out of the nation, right? But not in his power. And in the latter time of their kingdom, when the transgressors are come to the full, a king of fierce countenance and understanding dark sentences shall stand up. So it's again, at the end of their kingdom, what's going to happen? There's going to be a guy that comes out. What we're going to find out is he comes out of Assyria. So one of the first things that we should notice about the Antichrist is, where does he come from? He's going to have to come from Assyria, right? So it's not Arkansas, like everybody thought it was in the 90s because of Bill Clinton, right? Have you ever noticed a lot of that stuff is what we think politically tells us who people are? Let's get back to the book, right? So what we find out here is it's what? We find out the Antichrist is the king of fierce countenance, and understanding dark sentences shall stand up, and his power shall be mighty, but not by his own power. Now, what do we mean by that? Well, go over to Revelation. Hold your place there. Revelation chapter 13. Revelation chapter 13. And notice what we've got here. Revelation chapter 13, verse 1. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his horns 10 crowns, and upon his heads the name of blasphemy. And the beast which I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were as the feet of a bear, and his mouth is the mouth of a lion. And the dragon gave his power and his seat and great authority. Now, where is it that this king of fierce countenance gets his power? Is from the who? The dragon, right? So when we look at this, what do you notice about this beast? You've got, it's like a leopard, has feet of a bear, mouth of a lion, and you look at that stuff and you're like, that just looks like a conglomeration of a bunch of different things, right? Well, when you start thinking about what's taking place out there is whenever you get to iron mixed with miry clay, there's all this mixture going on, right? And that's one of the things that we see here. So where is it that he gets his power as the dragon? Notice in verse 3, and I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast, and they worshipped him, and they worshipped, notice, the dragon, which gave power unto the beast, and they worship the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Well, that should remind those folks of Exodus chapter 15, all right? Because there's something back there goes along with that as well. Notice, and there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies, and power is given unto him to continue 42 months. Now, when is it that that takes place? Is we're out here in this 70th week, and we're right there in that middle, all right? So again, when we think about these things, what obviously I've left off is what? Where we are, right? Because what we don't want to do is we don't want to go and study what the timeline that God lays out for the nation of Israel and try to put us in there, right? Because that's where we end up with a lot of trouble. Because then we're like, well, your car broke down, so I guess you're in the second. Your house burned down, so I guess you're in the third course, right? And people do that. You wouldn't think they do, but people do that. What have you done? Why is God trying to get even with you? What have you done to make him mad? And there's a lot of stuff with that. But back over in Daniel, Daniel chapter 8. I wanted to see where that power comes from. It's not him. It's somebody else. Daniel chapter 8, verse 24. We'll pick back up there again. And his power shall be mighty, but not of his own power, and he shall destroy wonderfully, and shall prosper and practice, and shall destroy the mighty and the holy people. And through his policy also he shall cause craft to prosper in his hand, and he shall magnify himself in his heart, and by peace shall destroy many. He shall also stand up against the prince of princes. Well, who's the prince of princes? Jesus Christ. Notice, but he shall be broken without hand. And the vision of the evening and the morning, which was told, is true. Wherefore shut thou up the vision, for it shall be for what? Many days. What's he saying? There's a whole bunch of stuff that's still taking place. Right? Now, what's interesting is, what needs to take place is, we need to have we need 10 toes, right? Chapter 2 brings up the 10 toes. Chapter 7 brings up the 10 horns, which are also brought up in Revelation 17, which are 10 kings. So what has to happen is there needs to be 10 kings and things like that before the Antichrist even appears. So there's a lot still left for them to be able to do that they're going to have to be able to do before those things take place. Now, go to Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11. And we're just going to spend some time in Daniel chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11, notice, we'll start here in verse 1. It says, Also I, in the first year of Darius the Mede, even I stood to confirm and to strengthen him. And now will I show thee the truth. Behold, there shall stand up yet 3 kings in Persia, and the fourth shall be far richer than they all. And by his strength through the riches he shall stir up all against the realm of Grecia. And a mighty king shall stand up that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. And when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken. Now, of course, again, verse 3 is talking about who? Alexander the Great. Notice, and when he shall stand up, his kingdom shall be broken and shall be divided towards the 4 winds of heaven, and not to his prosperity, nor according to his dominion which he ruled. For his kingdom shall be plucked up even for others beside those. Now what's interesting is, in verse 4, we see Alexander the Great's kingdom being split into 4 groups. Then in verse 5, what takes place is, we're taken way out over here. And that's, to me, that's one of those things, is just, God does this all the time through scriptures, right? We talked about last week, after the 69th week, Jesus Christ is crucified. The crucifixion of Jesus Christ is in a gap of time between the 69th week and the 70th week. We see that, hopefully, right? And within that gap, there's some other things that take place. Well, what happens here is we jump from there. Notice, and the king of the south shall be strong, and one of his princes, and of course, who's the king of the south is Egypt, shall be strong, we'll see that, and one of his princes, and he shall be strong above him, have dominion, his dominion shall be a great dominion, and in the end of years they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north. Well, who's the king of the north? Which one of those is south of Israel? Those folks. Who's north of Israel? Those folks. Who's west of Israel? Those folks. Who's east? Those. Notice, there's only two that really matter, right? King of the south, king of the north. Those are the only ones that we see here. Notice, keep on going. And in the end of years, they shall join themselves together, for the king's daughter of the south shall come to the king of the north to make an agreement. And she shall not retain the power of the arm, neither shall he stand, nor his arm, but she shall be given up. And they that brought her, and he that begat her, and he that strengthened her in these times. But out of a branch of her roots shall one stand up in his estate, which shall come with an army, and shall enter into the fortress of the king of the north, and shall deal against them, and shall prevail. And shall also carry captives into Egypt, their gods, with their princes, and with their precious vessels of silver and of gold, and he shall continue more years than the king of the south. So the king of the south shall come into his kingdom, and shall return into his own land. But his sons shall be stirred up, and shall assemble a multitude of great forces, and one shall certainly come and overflow and pass through. Then shall he return and be stirred up, even to his fortress. And the king of the south shall be moved with choler, and shall come forth and fight him, even with the king of the north. And he shall set forth a great multitude, but the multitude shall be given into his hand. And when he hath taken away the multitude, his heart shall be lifted up, and he shall cast down many 10,000s, and he shall not be strengthened by it. For the king of the north shall return, and shall set forth a multitude greater than the former, and shall certainly come after certain years with a great army, and with much riches. And in those times there shall many stand up against the king of the south. Also the robbers of thy people shall exalt themselves to establish the vision, but they shall fall. So the king of the north shall come and cast up a mount, and take the most fenced cities. And the arms of the south shall not withstand, neither his chosen people, neither shall there be any strength to withstand. But he that cometh against him shall do according to his own will, and none shall stand before him, and he shall stand in the glorious land, which by his hands shall be consumed. Now, if we drop down to, here we see, hopefully we see, of those four, there's really only two that we're actually dealing with here, the king of the north and the king of the south. Well, if we drop down to verse 29. In verse 21 and on, you see the Antichrist shows up. Verse 29 over here, we're towards the end of this, the second half of that tribulation period. And what's he going to do in the middle of that? And it goes back to what we read over in Revelation 13. And notice in verse 29, and the time appointed he shall return and come toward the south, but it shall not be as the former or as the latter. For the ships of Chittim shall come against him, therefore he shall be grieved and return and have indignation against the holy covenant. And what's he do here is he does what? He takes away the daily sacrifices, the daily oblations, and what's he do in verse 31? and arms shall stand on his part, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength, and shall take away the daily sacrifice, and they place the abomination that maketh desolate. Well, that takes place over here. All right? So another thing, it wasn't 70 AD. That's something that's going to take place in the middle of that tribulation period. All right? Now, let's move on back down to verse 36, because there's a couple things I want us to see here. Verse 36, and the king shall do according to his will. And of course, this is the Antichrist that we see here. This is the little horn that we read about back over in Daniel 7. But notice, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god. Notice that's a lowercase g. And shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers. Now, what's that tell us right there? You've got an Assyrian that's what? Jewish. So you start seeing a little bit more of who he is, right? Notice, neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself what? Above all. So here you've got an Assyrian Jew who's going to be the Antichrist here. So again, when we look at these things, don't get your theology from YouTube and TikTok. Let's just put it that way. Get to the book, right? Notice, but his estate shall he honor the God of forces. It's an interesting thing. You all know of a movie that talks about may the force be with you. Also, what's interesting too is, you think about these things, you're like, it is what it is. So here you've got iron, here you got iron mixed with miry clay and all that stuff. And here you're going to have an Iron Man that shows up. Now, what do we know about Iron Man? Iron Man's a good guy, right? Just throw it out there. You can do with it as you please. If you like Iron Man, Robert Downey Jr., that's fine. Didn't he go to school? Or is that somebody else? Johnny Depp went here. That's right. Yeah, Johnny Depp went. All right, verse 38. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. So if there's a God that his fathers knew not, who would those be? Or who would that God be? That little g God. Well, when you think about that, who are the little g gods are the angels. Specifically here, he's talking about fallen angels. Well, do you know of one who he might want to honor and give praise to for the power and all that stuff he gave him? Verse 39, thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory, and he shall cause them to rule over many. Well, who's the them? That's the 10 kings, and we'll see that one of these days. To rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships, and he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. And he shall enter also into the glorious land. Well, what's the glorious land? Israel. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand. Even Edom and Moab and the chief of the children of Ammon. Now, we're going to talk about those along with those 10 kings shortly. Notice, he shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Well, again, here you have this king in Assyria is being troubled by people out of the north, and that's that verse I was talking about. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas of the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him. Now, what do we know about his future? It's not good, right? Go to Isaiah chapter 10. Isaiah chapter 10. Isaiah chapter 10. Notice in, let's just start in verse 1. Woe unto them that decree unrighteous decrees, and that write grievous which they have prescribed, to turn aside the needy from judgment, and to take away the right from the poor of my people, that widows may be their prey, and that they may rob the fatherless. And what will ye do in the day of visitation and the desolation which shall come from far? To whom will flee for help? And where will ye leave your glory? Without me they shall bow down unto the prisoners, and shall fall under the slain. For all this is his anger is not turned away, but his hand is stretched out still. O Assyrian, the rod of mine anger, and the staff in their hand is mine indignation. I will send him against an hypocritical nation, and against the people of my wrath will I give him a charge, to take the spoil and to take the prey, and to tread them down like the mire of the streets. Howbeit he meaneth not so, neither doth his heart think so, but it is in his heart to destroy and to cut off nations, not a few. Well, who is it that he's talking about there? Well, the Assyrian there, he's saying, here's who I'm going to use to do this. Drop down to verse 23. For the Lord God of hosts shall make a consumption, even determined, in the midst of all the land. Therefore thus saith the Lord God of hosts, O my people that dwelleth in Zion, be not afraid of the Assyrian. He shall smite thee with a rod, and shall lift up his staff against thee after the manner of Egypt. For yet a little while, and the indignation shall cease, and mine anger in their destruction. And the Lord of hosts shall stir up a scourge for him, according to the slaughter of Midian, to the rock of Oreb. And as his rod was upon the sea, so shall he lift up after the manner of Egypt. And it shall come to pass in that day that his burden shall be taken away from off thy shoulder, and his yoke from off thy neck, and the yoke shall be destroyed because of the anointing. Again, what do we see there? Verse 5, we've got the Assyrian. Verse 24, we also have the Assyrian there. Jump over to chapter 14. Isaiah chapter 14. Isaiah chapter 14, verses 12 through 17. He's talking to who? He says, O Lucifer. And then what happens is he knows that he falls. Notice, drop down to verse 24. The Lord of hosts has sworn, saying, Surely as I have thought, so shall it come to pass, and as I have purposed, so shall it stand, that I will break the Assyrian in my land, and upon my mountains tread him under foot. Then shall his yoke depart from off them, and his burden depart from off their shoulders, this is the purpose that is purposed upon the whole earth, and this is the hand that is stretched out upon all the nations. For the Lord of hosts hath purposed, and who shall disannul it? And his hand is stretched forth, and who shall turn it back? Now you look at this. What's he saying there? What's going to happen to the Assyrian? It's not going to be good for him. What's his end going to be? You know, there's a time where specifically the nation of Israel, but folks are going to be able to look at Satan and say, this is the one. This one? And you look at that, and the reason why is because what's God going to do with him? He said, here's the purpose. This is the purpose. What's he going to do? And you stop and you think about, a little while back, what we talked about months ago. There's a difference. Did God have the power to have destroyed Lucifer the moment that he fell and got rid of it all? Yes. But what we talked about is, if somebody has all the power and no one has it, and everybody else has no power, that's not really an issue. But what God's doing is he's saying, okay, it's not about my power, because if I was able to do that, that doesn't really prove much. That just says that I've got the most power. But when my wisdom goes up against his wisdom, and God has a plan, and his plan is his wisdom. And what we see here is part of his wisdom is what we see up here for the nation of Israel. And what God's doing is he's going to show, because one of the things that Satan or Lucifer, one of his boasts was what? I will be like the Most High. I'm going to possess heaven and earth. And God says, you think so, but I want to show you something. Right? And what he does is he says, I'm going to tell you, Lucifer, now you're following your Satan. He says, I'm going to give you my plan. I've written it out. You have full access to it. Here's what I'm doing. And Satan still knows that his end is what? Destruction. And then what God does is here, and we talk about this all the time, right there God says what? By the way, I've got something secret that I'm not talked about, that I didn't let you know about. I'm going to take back the heavens too. And you look at that stuff and you're just like, what I want us to be able to think about is, should we know this stuff so that we don't get caught up in stuff and saying, because I get texts all the time from people. It's like, hey, go look at this video. Something's happened in Gaza. Quit worrying about it. Again, it's not, don't stick your head in it and don't stick your head in the sand and just say, whatever. But don't let that be the thing that runs our life. Right? The circumstances, the situations, and all that stuff out there, Israel's going to have a mess always. It's always been that way, and it's never going to stop until God brings that kingdom in. So then when we look at those things, don't get caught up in is the Antichrist, is he here yet? There's a bunch of stuff that still has to take place. We've not even gotten to that stuff yet. We've got to have 2 groups. We've got to have 10 kings. There's a lot of stuff that still has got to take place. And when I talk about the fact that all this stuff is still future, once we get up into here, all that stuff, when we see that stuff, what it does is it produces a comfort, really. It should. Because we're not caught up in, I grew up, Jack Van Ampe was on all the time. Dad disagreed 100% with everything that he said, but he didn't tell me why. But we still listened to him every day, and he was the great Bible mind, right? Well, if you're reading off a teleprompter, you can memorize anything. But that's what it is, and what he does is, this is a news article, this is this verse being fulfilled. Well, if we understand that prophecy cannot be fulfilled during mystery time, what's that do all of a sudden? Gives you a little bit of a comfort. Huh?
Puts the jack off the air.
Well, you look at that stuff and you're like, if you want to get, there's 2 ways to get a big group of people. 1, have a bunch of food. 2, talk about prophecy and how it's being revealed today. And you'll get a whole bunch of people that's still lost and still has no comfort and just still worried about everything. And one of the things that I want us to be able to go through here is understanding where we are. None of this is us. We're right here. Right? And if nothing else, as Paul says in Romans, the reason these things were written for our learning, that we through patience and comfort of the Scriptures might have hope. Hope comes from an assurance. God says, I'm going to do something. What's this produce in you? Not comfort or patience. Not hope. Because if you take ours away, then what you're left with, and that's the problem. A lot of times what people do is, let's get rid of the rapture, because that's coming next. And what do? They fearmonger people into coming in. They fearmonger people into giving, and they fearmonger people into professing false truths. Just to say, we had 43 of them were baptized. When you start worrying about numbers, that's what they're doing. All right. So, my thing with this is, don't get worried about what's going on in the world. Pay attention to it, but don't let that be the doctrine that we live our lives based on. And what's better is, if we know some of these things, we can go tell people, others, here's some comfort. Don't be worried about those things. Pay attention to them, but don't be completely mindful of them. All right? All right. The next one should be shorter, right? Probably not. All right. There we go. I knew I'd forget it, but there we go. All right.